Hello, my loves. When I was 50 years old, a doctor tried to teach me how to wipe myself. I wish I were kidding. I'd ask him to write me a prescription for a UTI. Instead, he launched into a full hygiene tutorial, front to back, by the way, in case you were wondering. While I sat there thinking, this man genuinely believes I've made it half a century without basic bathroom competence. I asked him, let me clarify what I'm hearing. You're teaching a 50-year-old woman how to wipe herself? He didn't blink. And that's the day I learned clarity doesn't require credentials. And sometimes the most confident person in the room is wrong. Which brings me to what I actually want to talk about today. Let's talk about trusting yourself versus trusting someone else's perspective. I'm going to say something that might make some people uncomfortable. Deepak Chopra's name appeared in Jeffrey Epstein's contact files. Not as an accused, not as a co-conspirator, but as a contact. Someone Epstein knew, someone in his orbit. And the response from many of his followers was immediate. Well, that doesn't mean anything. Lots of people were in those files. You can't judge someone by association, which technically is true. But here's what I want to examine. The speed at which people rushed to defend him. The reflex to protect the guru. The instinct to explain away proximity to harm rather than sit with discomfort long enough to ask better questions. Because this isn't really about Deepak Chopra. It's about what happens when we give our discernment away to someone we've decided is more enlightened, more credible, or more knowing than we are. It's about the moment we stop asking questions because asking feels like betrayal. It's about why we're so quick to trust authority, even spiritual authority, and so slow to trust ourselves. When I was 3 years old, my godmother used to take me to steal vegetables from this old man's garden who lived near us. And she'd post me at the end of the row, and I was supposed to yell, "Lord Almighty, here he comes," if I saw him coming. And I used to joke that that was my first experience with religion. Perform the ritual, avoid the consequences, and don't ask questions. Looking back, it is kind of funny. A 3-year-old standing guard while grown women filled their aprons with tomatoes and squash, invoking the Lord's name as both warning system and absolution. But here's what I also learned. Authority figures, even the ones who love you, will hand you a script and expect you to follow it. And if you're young enough, small enough, or uncertain enough, you will. You'll yell, "Lord Almighty," because somebody told you to. You'll assume the person giving orders knows something that you don't. You'll suppress the quiet voice inside you that says, wait, is this right? Because the person in charge said it was. That doctor who tried to teach me basic hygiene didn't see a competent 50-year-old woman standing in front of him. He saw a problem he was qualified to solve. He had the degree. He had the white coat. He had the presumed authority. And I'm sure, genuinely sure, that he believed he was helping. But here's the thing about authority. It doesn't just grant you the right to speak. It grants you the assumption that you're right, that your perspective is more valid, that your expertise overrides someone else's lived experience. Even when you're explaining bathroom hygiene to a middle-aged woman who's been managing her own bodily functions for 5 decades. That's not medicine. That's arrogance dressed up as care. And the reason it matters, the reason that I'm starting here, is because this is how authority works at every level. The person with the credentials assumes competence. The person without them assumes incompetence. And somewhere in that gap, discernment dies. What I've noticed working with high-functioning women for years is the more successful you are, the more you've been trained to trust external authority over internal knowing. You got good grades because a teacher said you did. You got the promotion because a boss said you deserved it. You built the career because the system validated it. And at some point, you stopped trusting the quiet voice inside you that says, this doesn't feel right. Because that voice doesn't have credentials. It doesn't have a degree. It doesn't have external proof. So you override it. You just tell yourself you're being irrational and emotional. Maybe you're being too sensitive. You defer to the expert, the guru, and the leader, the person with the platform and the following and the charisma. And here's the dangerous part. Most of the time, they're right. Most of the time, the doctor knows more about medicine than you do. Most of the time, the spiritual teacher has studied more text, done more meditation, walked further down the path. Most of the time, the authority figure has earned their authority, but not always. And the cost of not discerning the difference is steep. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to dismantle Deepak Chopra. I don't know what his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was. I don't know if he knew what Epstein was doing. I don't know if he was complicit, oblivious, or somewhere in between. What I do know is this: his name was in the files. And the response from many people was not, I need more information before I decide how I feel about this. It was, well, he's a spiritual leader. He wouldn't associate with someone like that. There must be an explanation. That's not discernment. That's faith. And faith in a guru is not the same as faith in yourself. Here's what the guru industrial complex has taught us. If you're enlightened enough, you transcend morality. If you're awakened enough, you're beyond judgment. If you're spiritually advanced enough, the rules don't apply to you the way they apply to everyone else. This is spiritual bypassing at scale. It's the idea that consciousness, awareness, and enlightenment exempt you from basic human accountability. That being awake means you can associate with predators and call it holding space for all souls. That being evolved means you can ignore harm and call it non-attachment. And when someone questions it, when someone says, wait, why was this person in those files? Why were they on that plane? Why were they at those dinners? They're told they're not spiritually mature enough to understand. They're not enlightened enough to see the big picture. They're not awake enough to grasp that judgment is a lower vibration. And that's how authority becomes untouchable. That's how inhumanity gets dressed up as transcendence. Let me be clear again. I'm not advocating for cancel culture. I'm not saying that everyone whose name appears in the Epstein files is guilty by association. I'm not saying we should burn down every spiritual teacher, every public figure, every person who ever shook hands with the wrong person at the wrong party. What I am saying is this: healthy skepticism is not the same as cynicism. Asking questions is not the same as condemnation. And refusing to blindly defend someone just because they've written books you love, taught workshops that changed you, or even built a platform that resonates with millions, that's not betrayal. That's discernment. Discernment says I can hold two things at once. I can appreciate the work someone has done and still ask hard questions about their associations. I can benefit from someone's teachings and still hold them accountable when their actions don't align with their words. I can admire someone's mind and still refuse to give them a pass on proximity to harm. This isn't about purity, it's about pattern recognition. And if we're so busy protecting the guru that we can't see the pattern, we stop thinking. Here's something I need to name. Women, especially high-functioning, accomplished, intelligent women, are disproportionately vulnerable to charismatic spiritual authority. Not because we're weak, not because we're naive, but because we've spent our entire lives being told that our internal knowing is unreliable. We've been taught to second-guess our instincts. We've been told we're too emotional, too sensitive, too reactive. We've been trained to defer to the man in the room who speaks with confidence, even when he's wrong. And then we reach midlife. We've built the career. We've raised the family. We've checked all the boxes, and we feel empty, disconnected, like the inside doesn't match the outside anymore. So we go looking for answers, and we find a guru, someone who speaks with certainty, someone who has the path, someone who promises that if we just follow the teachings, do the practices, attend the retreats, buy the books, join the membership, we will find the peace we're looking for. And we hand over our discernment. We stop asking, does this feel right? We start asking, well, what does the teacher say? And that is where the danger lives. Because a good teacher, a truly awake teacher, will hand your discernment back to you. They'll say, you already know, I'm just here to help you remember. But a guru who needs followers, they'll keep it. They'll tell you that doubt is ego, that questioning is resistance, that if you're not getting it, you're just not ready yet. And you'll keep trying. You'll keep showing up. You'll keep giving them money, time, energy, faith, because you've been told that surrender is the path. But surrender to what? To your own inner knowing? Or to someone else's version of what your knowing should be? Let's go back to Epstein for a moment, because this isn't just about one man. It's about a system. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't operating in a vacuum. He was surrounded by people who either knew what he was doing and said nothing, or didn't know because they chose not to look. He had scientists, politicians, billionaires, academics, philanthropists, spiritual leaders in his orbit. Some of them took his money. Some of them attended his parties. Some of them flew on his plane. And when it all came out, the response from many was, I had no idea. Which might be true. But here's the uncomfortable question. At what point does I had no idea stop being an excuse and start being willful ignorance? At what point does proximity to power, especially power built on exploitation, require us to ask harder questions? And at what point do we stop giving people credit for not knowing what they should have known? Because here's the truth. When you're in rooms with power, you feel the dynamics. You sense when something is off. You notice who's uncomfortable, who's performing, who's managing images, and who's working too hard to appear clean. And you make a choice. You either ask questions or you don't. You either excuse yourself or you stay. You either trust your gut or you override it because the person hosting the party has money, influence, and a reputation you don't want to challenge. That's not about guilt. That's about complicity. And complicity doesn't require intent. It just requires silence. So what do we do? How do we navigate a world full of experts and gurus, authorities, and confident voices when our own inner knowing has been trained out of us since childhood? What I know is trusting yourself doesn't mean rejecting all external input. It means learning to distinguish between information and indoctrination. It means asking, is this person handing me a tool or a script? It means noticing when someone's teaching activates your clarity or your compliance. Because here's the difference. A teacher who wants you awake will make you uncomfortable. A guru who wants you obedient will make you calm. A teacher who trusts your discernment will say, what do you think? A guru who needs your faith will say, this is the way. A teacher who respects your authority will challenge you to think harder. A guru who needs your submission will tell you to stop thinking altogether. And if you're in a room, physical or digital, where questioning is framed as resistance, where doubt is pathologized as fear, where disagreement is dismissed as lower consciousness, you're not in a learning environment. You're in a control system. And it's time to leave. This is where it gets complicated. What do you do when the guru whose associations make you uncomfortable is also the person whose work changed your life? What do you do when the teacher you're questioning is the one who helped you see yourself clearly for the first time? What do you do when the book that saved you was written by someone whose proximity to harm you can't ignore? This is the part no one wants to talk about. Because it's a lot easier to split people into good and bad, guilty and innocent, or enlightened and corrupt. But life really doesn't work that way. People are complex. Someone can write beautiful, true, transformative work and still make choices that betray those very principles. Someone can teach you how to meditate, how to breathe, how to find peace, and still associate with people who cause harm. Someone can be right about some things and catastrophically wrong about others. And you're allowed to hold all of that at once. You're allowed to say, this work helped me, and I have questions about this person's associations. This teaching changed me, and I don't trust this person's silence on accountability. This book was a gift, and I will not defend this author's proximity to exploitation. You don't have to burn the books. You don't have to erase the impact. But you also don't have to keep giving this person your faith, your money, or your defense. You can take what helped and leave the rest. You can honor what the work gave you without protecting the person who created it from legitimate scrutiny. And that's not betrayal. That is discernment. I want to share about a moment when I didn't trust myself and what it cost me. Years ago, I was in a healing space with a practitioner who came highly recommended. Everyone said they were gifted, transformational, the real deal. And they were skilled. I can't deny that. But something felt off. The way that they spoke to clients, the way they positioned themselves as the sole authority on what was true for someone else's body, someone else's trauma, or someone else's healing. There was a moment, and I remember it clearly, when I thought, I need to leave. And then I thought, but everyone says they're amazing. Maybe I'm just not open enough. Maybe I'm resisting the work. And so I stayed. And it got worse. Not dangerous, not abusive, just wrong. It's wrong for me. It was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, but I could feel in my body. And I kept overriding it. Because this person had credentials I didn't have. Because they spoke with confidence I didn't feel. Because everyone else seemed fine. So clearly, the problem was me. It took months before I finally honored the quiet voice that had been whispering from the beginning. Leave. And when I did, when I finally walked away, I felt relief. Not because they were a bad person, but because I had stopped trusting myself and started trusting someone else's certainty more than my own discomfort. That's the cost. Not the money I spent or the time that I wasted. The cost was the months I spent doubting my own knowing because someone else's authority seemed more legitimate than my own gut. Here's something I've learned. Your body knows before your brain does. When something's off, you feel it first. A tightness in your chest or a knot in your stomach. A pulling back that you can't explain, and your mind rushes in with explanations. You're just being judgmental, or you're not enlightened enough to understand, or you're just projecting your own trauma. You're resistant to growth. All of which might be true, but also might not be. Because sometimes, often actually, your gut is picking up on patterns your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. Your gut knows when someone's words don't match their energy. Your gut knows when someone's teaching creates dependence instead of autonomy. Your gut knows when someone's charisma is covering something hollow. And your job is not to rationalize it away. Your job is to listen. Not with blind faith and not with paranoia, but with the same quiet attention you'd give to the sound of wind in the trees, or the feeling of rain on glass, or the moment right before you know something is about to shift. That, my friends, is discernment. That's the voice you've been trained to ignore. And it's time to let it speak. Here's the question I want you to sit with. Who am I defending and why? Not in a punitive way, not in a way that demands you disavow everyone that you've ever learned from, but in a way that asks, am I defending this person because the facts support them, or because I need them to be innocent? Am I explaining away their associations because I genuinely believe there's nothing there, or because it's too uncomfortable to consider that they might have been complicit? Am I protecting their reputation because they earn my trust, or because dismantling their authority would dismantle something in me I'm not ready to face? These are hard questions, and I'm not asking them lightly, because I know what it feels like to realize that someone you respected, someone whose work mattered to you, someone you defended publicly, made choices you can't reconcile with the values they claim to teach. It's disorienting. It's painful. It feels like losing something you needed. But the truth is, you don't need them. You never did. What you needed was permission to trust yourself. And if you got that permission from their work, good. Take it. It's yours now. But the person who gave it to you doesn't get to keep your discernment as payment. Let's talk about what accountability looks like when it's not performative. Because I'm not interested in public floggings, I'm not interested in watching someone grovel on social media to appease the algorithm. I'm certainly not interested in apologies that are designed to make us feel better without requiring the person to actually change. Real accountability looks like this. I was in proximity to harm. Here's what I knew. Here's what I didn't know. Here's what I should have asked and didn't. And here's what I'm doing differently now. Real accountability doesn't defend. It doesn't explain away. It doesn't ask us to understand before it's willing to be understood. Real accountability says, I was there. I saw things that didn't sit right, and I didn't say anything. And now I'm looking at why. That's not weakness. That's integrity. And if the people whose names appear in the Epstein files, whether they're scientists, billionaires, spiritual teachers, can't offer that level of transparency, then we're allowed to withdraw our trust. Not punitively, but protectively. Because trust isn't something you owe someone because they once helped you. Trust is something you extend when someone's actions consistently align with their words. In proximity to exploitation, silence in the face of harm breaks that alignment. Here's why I'm writing this, speaking this. Not just because of Deepak Chopra, not just because of Jeffrey Epstein, but because this pattern is everywhere. It's in religious institutions that protect abusers and silence victims. It's in corporate structures that elevate charisma over competence. It's in wellness spaces that prioritize profit over people. It's in political systems that reward power and punish dissent. And it's in our own minds every time we override our gut because someone with more credentials, more confidence, or more followers told us to. This is not a Deepak Chopra problem. This is an authority problem. This is a discernment problem. This is a we've been trained to trust everyone except ourselves problem. And until we reclaim that, until we stop handing our knowing over to people who speak louder, dress better, or charge more, we'll keep finding ourselves in rooms with people who don't deserve to be there. We'll keep defending people who don't deserve our defense. We will keep silencing the quiet voice inside us that says something's wrong here. And we'll keep calling it faith when it's actually fear. Fear that if we question the authority, we'll lose access to the wisdom. Fear that if we challenge the guru, we'll be cast out of the community. And fear that if we trust ourselves, we'll be wrong. The truth is, you're already wrong sometimes. We all are. The difference is whether you're wrong because you trusted yourself and learned something, or whether you're wrong because you trusted someone else and abandoned yourself in the process. Let me bring this back to where we started. That doctor who tried to teach me how to wipe myself, he wasn't a bad man. I actually love him. I love him. He wasn't trying to humiliate me. He genuinely believed he was helping. And that is the scariest part. Because people with authority, real authority, earned authority, credentialed authority, often believe they're helping even when they're overstepping, even when they're condescending, even when they're wrong. And if I had been younger or less confident, I might have walked out of that office thinking, well, maybe I have been doing it wrong. Maybe I do need help with this. And that is how insidious it is. That's how quickly someone else's certainty can override your own knowing. And if it can happen with something as basic as hygiene, something I've been doing successfully for 50 years, imagine how easily it happens with something as complex as spirituality, something as nebulous as enlightenment, or as intangible as inner knowing. When someone with a platform, a following, and a reputation tells you, this is the path, this is the way, this is the truth, and your gut says, but what about this thing over here that doesn't sit right? Whose voice are you going to trust? The guru's or yours? Here's what I'm inviting you to do. Stop defending. Not forever, not with everyone, but just for a moment, stop. Stop explaining away associations you don't understand. Stop protecting people who haven't asked for your protection. Stop silencing your own questions because they feel uncomfortable, and instead sit with the discomfort. Let the question land. Let yourself not know. Let yourself wonder if maybe, just maybe, the person you've been defending doesn't deserve it. Not because they're evil, not because they're guilty, but because defending them requires you to ignore your own discernment, and that cost is too high. What I know is this: you don't need a guru to tell you what's true. You don't need a teacher to give you permission to trust yourself. You don't need credentials to validate your own knowing. You already know. You've always known. The work is not learning something new. The work is unlearning the belief that someone else's certainty is more reliable than your own gut. The work is coming home to yourself. The work is realizing that clarity doesn't require credentials. And sometimes, actually, the most confident person in the room is wrong. I don't know what Deepak Chopra knew or didn't know about Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know what conversations happened, what red flags were missed, what choices were made, but I do know this: we don't owe him or anyone the benefit of the doubt at the expense of our own discernment. We don't owe anyone our faith when the facts are still unfolding. We don't owe anyone our silence when our gut is screaming. And if you've spent years or even decades or a lifetime learning to trust everyone except yourself, it's time to stop. Not because the gurus are all corrupt, not because the experts are all wrong, but because the only authority that matters in the end is the one you carry inside you. The one that's been whispering all along. The one that knows. Trust that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for having the courage to sit with uncomfortable questions. If this resonated with you, share it. If it didn't, consider sitting with why. Either way, trust yourself. Stay steady, my loves. We still aren't done here yet.